And welcome back. I'm with Carlos Garcia and Michael Johnson. They're the two candidates in the District 8 runoff for the Phoenix Council election. This is our online portion of our debate this morning, and glad you could stick with us. I want to go back to law enforcement. It became an issue during the recent Phoenix mayoral campaign. Michael Johnson, you should have said a few moments ago, you believe there need to be more cops on the streets in your district. Why?
Because the officers have to respond. I just recently talked to some officers that says that anytime they make an arrest, it takes 3 hours off the street that those officers are actually off the streets doing the arrest, doing the paperwork, and having that time to come in. When those officers are off the street, that means that they're not responding to any crimes or any needs of the citizens within the community. And so we need to have more officers that are able to get there. And we also need to have more officers so that we can continue to do those community projects. When I was on the police department, did an officer-friendly program, worked in the Boys Club, and that relationship that you're able to build with those young people coming up in the community has a lifetime effect, an impact and effect on them. So I think that it is necessary for us to do that to make sure that we continue to provide the quality of service that our citizens deserve.
Do you agree with that case for more cops on the streets?
I think public safety goes beyond more cops on the streets. I do think there's a fleet and infrastructure need that police has. I've heard stories of officers having to wait at the precinct until another officer finishes their shift to come get their cop car. I do think there's an infrastructure and fleet need, but I think public safety needs to go beyond just more officers, specifically at a time where we're in crisis, where we have incidents of racial profiling and deaths at the hands of police. And so I think we need to deal with that crisis before we move forward and put more cops on the streets.
So specifically, how would you deal with that crisis as you describe it?
I think it begins with the Civilian Review Board. I think it begins, those 44 officers that had police-involved shootings last year, no one knows what happened with them. We need a Civilian Review Board. We need people from the community that can sit in front of them and figure out what happened and why these shootings are happening. There's a New York Times article last year calling attention to this, that Phoenix is the deadliest city at the hands of police.
Do we need a Civilian Review Board?
I think we have a Use of Force Review Board. We also have the Human Relations Commission, and I would not be opposed to looking at what are the options when we talk about a Use of Force Review Board, because there are so many different options that come along with a Use of Force Review Board. So I would really have to take the opportunity to look and see what the structure would actually be.
Do Phoenix police have a problem when it comes to dealing with minority communities?
I don't want to say that they have a problem when it comes to dealing with minority communities. I think that the issues that we're having with the police department is widespread. It's not just focused on the minority communities.
I mean, there was an incident with Mike himself that the police went over and crossed the line. And I think there was a process that began to address those issues when that incident happened that never fell through. I think there's good ideas there. We see body cams going into effect this year. We need to now insert policies and make sure a lot of the things that came out of the incident Mike was there get implemented and police are held accountable.
And that incident in 2010, 2011, when
Yes.
an officer confronted you.
Yes, sir. And that was the right thing to do. What the city did is got together, is that put together a committee to start looking at how do we come up with and what policies do we need to make, needs to be recommended. But I also want to make sure that when that incident happened, that not only did I get recalls from people within the District 8 or minority community, but people throughout the city were talking about the impacts that this has on them and what they need to actually do, and telling me that, hey, you know, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad it happened to you because you could put a name with it. And having the ability and opportunity to really to work amongst the community, with the police department, with your citizens, in order to come about the best policies that we can actually put out there for the city of Phoenix.
You both heard each other answer questions now for several weeks, several months. Carlos Garcia, what question has Michael Johnson not answered yet, do you think, to the satisfaction of voters?
I think what's going to be different. I think we know what we had in you, and I think people are thankful for your service. But what's going to be different? You say trust and known leadership. What's going to change? Because the city has changed, and we have different needs, and we have different crises. And you know, win or lose, I still live in District 8, and I really would like to know what's going to be different. What have you learned from the past, both from being in council and then being in the work you've been doing the last 5 years?
And actually, it's not just the work I've been doing for the last 5 years. It's the work that I've been doing all my adult life to work in the community to improve the quality of life. But when you go to look at it, you start to look at what we have done in South Phoenix, and not only in South Phoenix, but in the districts. Talk about the new parks that we actually built. Talk about the new libraries that we actually put. Talk about the improvement of Baseline Road Corridor. Talk about the improvements that we did with the airport, the Indian School Road Corridor that actually did. Talk about South Phoenix being one of the highest crime rates, that while I was in office, it became the lowest crime rate that we actually have. To work and continue to improve on those type of quality of services that we actually have, that is my responsibility. That's the responsibility of the councilman, to make sure they're able to really impact the community. And also talk about the senior programs, the youth programs that we have. Going back to Washington, D.C., lobbying for CDBG programs and those programs that we have. I really say that those things have been answered, because I would put my record up against any record of anyone who would say that we didn't have funds in South Phoenix. And if you really look at District 8, during the time that I was there, they received more funding and federal funding and CDBG funding than anywhere else.
Development
Yes.
block grants. All right, and same question for you, Michael Johnson. What question hasn't Carlos Garcia answered to the satisfaction of voters?
I think, Carlos, that it seems as though you are supportive of the police department. However, you've been in protests against the police department, as well as having the opportunity that you actually have gotten arrested, really. It was Sheriff Joe, or what happened down at the Capitol when some of the students were there and chained themselves up, that you really haven't answered that question, because you seem to be going in the middle or in between those things.
And what, the question is what exactly?
The question is that, is there support of the police department, or are you against the police department or the process within the city?
I'm supportive of the people. This campaign is to put people first, and I want to make sure that the people are taken care of and police officers accountable. I think police officers too are people, and they have mental health issues, and they have PTSD, and they have to deal with a lot of things that are, I guess, the bad parts of our society. And so I think we need to start looking at police as also people and making sure that we bridge that gap. What's happening now is that trust has been absolutely broken, from deportations with Sheriff Arpaio and SB 1070 to now violence at the hands of the police. And so we need to figure out how to get that done. There's cities like Oakland, who after the Oscar Grant situation went to 0 deaths at the hands of the police. And I think we can accomplish that in Phoenix and remove that black eye that is Phoenix is the deadliest city at the hands of police.
I have to just disagree, because I think that the citizenship here in the city of Phoenix, the community are overly supportive still of police department, that there's not a big distrust of the overall community within the city of Phoenix. There may be some aspects where that's the issue, but the overall citizens, in which we represent the entire city and all citizens and people within the city of Phoenix, that there is overwhelmingly trust in community block parks, neighborhood association, different programs that you actually have, that those things are existing there. But I think that you are right, that there are infrastructure issues with vehicles and other issues that we have actually with the police department, but we have to look at how do we bring those things together. We have to move past that and start talking about how are we going to find funding to bring more sources into the city. What are we going to do for economic development, for the growth of the actual city, to continue to move this city forward and to continue to progress. Those are the things I think that we really have to focus on. And the police department has, which you have more officers out there on the street, you have more officers that are able to communicate, but when officers are having 3 hours to put somebody in jail, or to book take a person, a criminal off the street, that officer is no longer able to call if you have an emergency situation that comes up. You may not have officers to respond. When citizens are saying that they can't get an officer for 2 or 3 hours, that's a problem, because there are services that the city needs to make sure, and that goes along with that service. It's just not that, but it's also all of the services that the entire city of Phoenix and city employees provide to the citizens.
Excuse me, sir, I'm going to have to invoke the no filibuster rule.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate.
I want to, Carlos Garcia, I want to go to you. You've talked about distancing Phoenix from President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He has talked about sending the migrants at the border to so-called sanctuary cities. Do you want Phoenix to become a sanctuary city?
Phoenix needs to be a city that welcomes everyone. If you go down to the Greyhound station as those people that he's threatening to send other places, they're here. They're in Phoenix and they're in our streets, and we need to support them. These are little children. These are entire families that have already passed their critical fear. They have a reason. They've been allowed in the country. We need to support them. And I do believe that the city police department, we've already talked about how stressed they are, that we don't need to add another job, which is immigration enforcement, to their job. That's a federal system that needs to be taken care of. The city of Phoenix needs to worry about taking care of its own people, not handling Donald Trump's dirty work.
So it sounds like you're saying, yes, Phoenix should be a sanctuary city by not helping out with immigration
Yes,
control.
yes. City of Phoenix should not be worried about immigration policies.
Okay. Michael Johnson?
I think the federal government has to come up with a comprehensive immigration reform policy. I think that they have to set partisan politics aside and come up with something that's comprehensive that we can do throughout the nation, that we can move this issue forward with the immigration issue.
Last question, and there's a striking contrast. Downtown Phoenix, a lot of money going there. Just a short step away, South Phoenix, I don't see much going on there when it comes to development. Is that a fair assessment? You live there, is that?
I live there, and I would say that, you know, when you look at downtown, there's a lot going into downtown, but you know, downtown's about jobs, it's about education, it's about providing a quality of life, not only for downtown, but the citizens around. You look at South Phoenix and you look at the Baseline Road Corridor, the improvement that was there. There was a time when there was no sit-down restaurants and no activity there, and then you have activity. You have more people moving in because of the improvements that are happening, not only to South Phoenix, but in the eastern part of the city. And the same thing we're seeing that's going to start happening in the Levine area, which was once just mainly a farm area.
We could better South Phoenix without thinking of the people that are going to move in, which equates to gentrification. We can better our city for the people that already live there, not better it for those that we think are going to come later. I think we need to share the wealth and what's happening downtown into South Phoenix. There's still a stat I keep repeating in this campaign. South of the I-17, life expectancy is 10 years less than north of the I-17. There's a lot of determinants to that and a lot of things we have to do better. If I do anything while in City Council for District 8, if we can shorten that and create a larger life expectancy for our community, I would feel self-served.
All right. Carlos Garcia, Michael Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Great discussion.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us.